Hello everyone. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Caroline. I'm one of the distance learning specialists here at the Liberty Science Center. Today, we're going to be talking about 3D printed prosthetics. I'm going to be switching through a few different cameras today. My camera that you're seeing here on screen and my document camera. We're going to be doing an activity at the very end, and I'm going to be showing you some really cool models and different examples. So as I said, as soon as we're ready to get started, why don't you just say hello in our Q&A on our Facebook, in our chat, and I'll give you a little shout out. So I see some of our friends from Patterson, Elizabeth, New Jersey, Clark, New Jersey, Union, New Jersey, Denville, Secaucus. We have people from everywhere. Thank you all again for joining us today. Today, our lesson is going to be about 3D printed prosthetics. So before I dive into this topic, I want you to take a moment to think about all of the trivial activities you've done today. Maybe brushed your teeth this morning, tied your shoes, gotten dressed, you maybe ate some breakfast. Now, imagine if your physical ability to perform these tasks was severely impeded. It is the most ordinary activities that would impact our lives the most if we weren't able to do them. Yearly, there's an estimate of 1 in 2,000 people born with all or part of a limb missing in the United States. So this number includes anything from a missing part of a finger, a hand, to the absence of both arms and legs. So growing up, many people with this disability as children learn to do the daily tasks that I mentioned above through the help of others or through the use of a prosthetic. So a prosthetic is also known as an assistive device. And over the last 10 to 20 years, there have been incredible advancements made with modern prosthetics. And when I'm talking about modern prosthetics, I'm referring to just the arm that doesn't move. It's kind of just in place of where a real limb would be. So with these advancements over the years involves rising costs. A modern prosthetic costs anywhere between $1,500 to $8,000. And that's not even referring to more bionic and robotic prosthetics that cost in the tens of thousands of dollars. So these modern prosthetics will last someone around the average of 5 years in reference to quality. And for a child, for example, a 5-year-old who requires the use of a prosthetic, they are continually growing and changing. So every few years, for example, by the time that 5-year-old turns 18 years old, their bodies will have grown and changed so much that they will have outgrown that normal prosthetic numerous times, requiring new prosthetics to either be purchased or custom made to that significant person. So we're going to be talking about 3D printed prosthetics. But before we talk about 3D printed prosthetics, I want to teach you a little bit about 3D printing. So while it seems as though 3D printing has emerged recently, it actually began in the development of 3D printing began in as early as the 1980s to 1990s. And if you don't know what a 3D printer is, I'd like you to think about it as sort of a hot glue gun. So a 3D printer is a device that takes an image, a file from a computer, and turns it into a three-dimensional object by stacking something called filament that you can see in this top right corner, layers and layers on top of each other. You can create any design practically and print it using a 3D printer. There's a lot of design softwares online that are free. Here's an example in this presentation on some screen captures on some design softwares. The large image is a free online software known as Tinkercad, and it's one of my favorites to use in regards to prototyping and creating really basic models. I think it's a great starter for anyone interested in starting to learn about some 3D printing. So the process of 3D printing involves an individual creating first a three-dimensional image of the item that they want to create. That's using the software that I'm showing you on screen. Then the printing process involves that material, that filament being sprayed on that printer bed that you can see in this animation, being stacked on top of each other, layer by layer. I have an example of some filament here. So this is a plastic filament. It's also known as PLA. So 3D printers can use plastics, metals, resins, ceramics, depending on the item that you want to create. So plastics, although they are the most common, metals can be beneficial when creating something that requires much more support. So when you're talking about printing with resin or something ceramic, that's a 3D print that after you print it can be heated and molded into a few different shapes. So 3D printers allow you to innovate your ideas, make your ideas go from screen to that file to something three-dimensional, something realistic. They allow for that rapid prototyping, that invention. And when you 3D print something called body-powered prosthetics, you can do it for a little less than $100. So what I mean by body-powered prosthetics, and I'm going to show you by switching over to my document camera, I mean that prosthetics that require no circuits, no mechanics, no electricity, and no wires, but are still able to move, grasp, and get and hold things just as if a normal hand was doing it. So for people who have an amputation that allows them to have enough of a functioning wrist to bend up and down in this kind of motion, they're able to use a 3D printed body-powered prosthetic. What I mean by body-powered is that the body powers this prosthetic to have different functions, such as being able to, if I push onto this prosthetic, and create enough force, I'm able to create this closed fist. And you see a lot of different mechanics and a lot of different pieces that are working together, which I will talk about shortly. But I just wanted to show you what I mean by this body-powered prosthetic. So on the presentation screen, you see these wrist-powered devices. So they do require an individual to have enough of a functioning wrist. So this image may give you a better perspective of what I mean by a functioning wrist. So although there are some fingers missing, this individual has enough of a wrist to bend up and down. So they're able to create enough force in this prosthetic to bend up and down, as you can see, this corner, move up and down and create that open and close fist. And there's a lot of pieces working together. So you see this pulley system runs up, these wires, these elastic strings run up through the fingers and connect. So when I create that force and you see that extension, that's what creates the prosthetic to open and close. So as I said, I'm going to dive into it a little bit more, but I want to talk about how these prosthetics are possible for a lot of individuals. So if the great thing about 3D printing is the opportunity to share your designs. So I mentioned that these 3D printed prosthetics are inexpensive, they're easy to create, but if I'm an individual who requires a prosthetic and I don't have access, one, to a 3D printer nearby, what could my options be? So when I first began to become interested in prosthetics, it was through being involved in EMS. So I've been an EMT for a few years now, and I encountered a patient who required the use of both of two arm prosthetics. She was a double amputee in both her arms. So I was really inspired by her story and wanted to learn more about prosthetics. And that's when I encountered a volunteer organization called Enable Online. So the organization is called Enabling the Future Online. They're an volunteer organization that partners individuals who have 3D printers and the ability to assemble these prosthetics to individuals who require these prosthetics. So if you have a 3D printer at home, you can find this file to create a prosthetic device like this online. So what this is called open sourcing. So with open sourcing on 3D designs, companies or designers provide files of 3D prints that they've designed online for the public. Open source files are customizable designs to who the design is meant for. So what do you think happens when you combine open sourcing with 3D printing? It is a complete game changer. So these people are able to 3D print these prosthetics at home and adjust the designs based on measurements, different requirements. So if you have a 3D printer accessible to you at maybe your university or at a library, or you do have a 3D printer at home, you're able to inquire on one of these volunteer websites, such as Enable. You're provided with measurements from inquiry of someone who requires this prosthetic, be able to print out these pieces for them and assemble the prosthetic. And then you ship it out and send it to them, and their prosthetic becomes available to them. So now let's talk a little bit about the versatility. So we dived into the open sourcing and how 3D printed prosthetics are becoming accessible and affordable to many different individuals. So versatility. There's different models of these 3D printed prosthetic based on the individual's needs. So I'm going to switch over to my document camera so I can give you a better view. So over here, I have one design of this 3D printed prosthetic, and as you can see, all of these wires are exposed. And if you go on the Enable website, you can see a few different models, and this model right here is called the Raptor design. So this was assembled using many, many different pieces, as you just saw on my presentation, and I will switch back to that. And while there are a lot of benefits to 3D printing these prosthetics, there's a lot of limitations as well. So over time, although these prosthetics, here's another example of the same model, just on a larger scale. And I also have a third model that has the wires covered, so they're not exposed. This is a model for a smaller individual or maybe a younger child. So these wires are exposed to prevent any unnecessary wear and tear or any friction on those wires, whereas someone older can use a model like this without the risk of those wires tugging. So while modern prosthetics still dominate over 3D printing prosthetics, these 3D printed prosthetics are still able to be redone over and over again. They're able to be remade. If a piece breaks on it, you're able to just replace it or fix it, 3D print it again. It may take a few minutes or an hour or two just to print a finger that may need to be replaced, whereas on full body models, you're not able to do that. Another disadvantage to this compared to more modern prosthetics, and the reason why we see a more younger audience using these 3D printed prosthetics versus an older audience, so older adults, is because the weight barrier. So modern prosthetics can hold a stronger weight barrier, whereas 3D printed prosthetics, you're not really able to lift more than 30, 20 pounds. But with these prosthetics, you're still able to function and perform many tasks, such as grab a bottle of water, maybe play catch. You're able to hold a bicycle. You're able to do a lot of things that a normal prosthetic that doesn't function with this movement isn't able to provide. So we talked about the various advancements with these prosthetics, and I want to talk about different kind of prosthetics as well. So like humans, so before I move on to the next topic, I just want to show you a dissected version of the assembly process with this 3D printed prosthetic. So you can see this 3D printed prosthetic exposed and the numerous amounts of pieces that go into creating this device. Although it looks very simple, I would estimate the assembly of one of these prosthetics taking an individual around 2 to 4 hours. So to give you a better perspective, to assemble this smaller prosthetic, the printing in total took about a day and a half, 2 days, printing each piece individually, and then the assembly I would estimate took around 4 to 5 hours because you want to make sure all of the pieces fit precisely, there's sanding, there's customization involved, and going on to these different models, if you don't have enough of a functioning wrist to bend up and down, and your amputation extends farther, and you have enough of an elbow to bend up and down, you can use a different kind of prosthetic. So as I'm showing now on screen, you're able to see one of these different kind of prosthetics. The one in the closer right feature that features that volunteer organization's website is that elbow powered device. So if I have enough of a functioning elbow to bend up and down, I'm able to use one of these elbow powered prosthetics. So like humans, many animals have either lost a limb or been born without a limb, and they're struggling with mobility because of it. So prosthetics have been available to humans for years, and the costs may vary based on quality, but thanks to technology and years of research and these advancements on human prosthetics, animal prosthetics are able to become a real possibility. So this gorgeous little husky named Derby is one that uses these incredible 3D printed prosthetics. So I want you to check out in this animation how well Derby runs on his prosthetic. They're designed to allow him to go fast and are similar to those athletic blades that you may see worn by some human athletes. So 3D printing has been used to make prosthetics for dogs like Derby, as well as maybe those custom wheelchairs, those custom chariots that you've seen on some animals. They definitely help chase those mailmans in style. So I want to show you some other animal prosthetics. So we started with beaks on birds, but there's other artificial limbs that can help them as well. So one of the most famous examples is Bagpipes, the penguin, in that small left corner. So in a zoo in New Zealand in 2016, this little guy was given a 3D printed foot, and over years that design's been customized and edited to suit his needs. A number of turtles and tortoises have now received various 3D printed materials. So this little tortoise from Brazil was given the world's first 3D printed shell after she was involved in a forest fire. So she needed a shell to protect her body. So a group called Animal Avengers, an incredible group, gave this little tortoise a name Fred, and they 3D printed this incredible shell to cover and protect her body as if a normal shell was there. So tortoises and turtles can't regrow their shells after they've been damaged or injured, but this assistive device allows the turtle to live a normal life. And our last animal is Beauty, the bald eagle. So she was rescued and featured on a few famous websites, and she was given a 3D printed beak to replace her previously injured beak. And it's incredible because she has the most uplifting story, and her story is extremely heartfelt. Her rescuers through months of engineering into creating her prosthetic beak, and she was one of the first birds to receive this prosthetic beak, and it led to more incredible discoveries later on. So more and more pets are using, and animals are using artificial limbs to live a more and active life along with people. But how did these designs come to life? So I'm gonna switch over to my document camera for you. And I wanna talk to you a little bit about the prototyping process with prosthetics. So with prototyping and with these kinds of designs, I want to talk about the engineering and design process. But before I do that, do I have any questions? I may receive them a little delayed, but I'm going to look at the Q&A for a second and see if there's any questions coming in. So Sherry wants to know if you need a special 3D printer to make this. So there's a few different 3D printers that you can use to create these kind of prosthetics or other incredible projects using 3D printing. I can attach some later on, but you can look at the Enable website for some recommendations, or just a PLA printer would be a good option for anyone interested in a good starter printer. There's printers that are a variety of prices, and you can start at a really, really low price. 3D printing has been accessible for a lot of people due to the low cost of it. So with this 3D printed design and something called the engineering and design process, the individuals who were involved in making these prosthetics, making these ideas possible for individuals, went through something called the engineering and design process. So say you have a really good idea and you want to not forget it. You want to write it down. You want to draw it out. It's really difficult to just go onto this 3D printing software and create this kind of design from scratch and just have that idea at hand. You know, you really want to plan out your idea, you want to plan out your structure. So now is a good time for any of our guests who want to be involved into our prototyping section. So after this, I'm going to do a quick Q&A session, but with these 3D designs, numerous prototypes had to be made before this final design was completed. I have a really great example of a prototype, and I'm going to leave this one here to compare the prototype designs for you. So this prototype design is a raw version of this design. Although they may look very similar, this is not the same functioning prosthetic as this prosthetic. So this device was used to create the prototype, to create that idea of creating these incredible 3D printed prosthetics. So although this idea I can fit on my hand, I wouldn't be able to put this on my hand because I have a functioning hand. These prosthetics are made for people who do not have a hand. That's something I just want to emphasize. So this prototype design also had to emerge from somewhere. Don't you all agree? Someone had to have maybe sketched this idea out or written this idea out, or had known that creating this kind of pulley system with these wires, this elastic, was going to be able to create this bend. So I don't have the elastics in right now, but normally this kind of material, this elasticy material, is used for these 3D printed designs because it's stretchy, it's very flexible. And I took out the elastics here to show you these components. So you have these bridges, and these bridges on this design are practically identical to this final project. You have these bridges where those elastics would ideally run through, connecting to these top fingers, going through these inserts, through these holes, and it's identical to that bending factor. Be able to create that bend, and those elastics would have been pulled, creating those hands to have that open and close effect, identical to this prosthetic. So we're talking about prototyping in these different phases. So now I want to inspire you and maybe show you a way of how I was able to prototype a design for making 3D printed prosthetics using just some household items that I had lying around. So while I get my items and my station set up, these items are going to be some plastic straws. So I have mine pre-cut up, but some straws. You only need 2 to 3 for this prototyping project, and I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in a second. But in the meantime, if anyone wants to start their questions, have some questions flowing in, and I'm going to answer them as soon as possible. So I talked about that prototyping platform, that engineering and design process. So this idea of these prosthetics, this real life model, had to emerge from somewhere. And to me, I always get my best ideas on pencil and paper. I sketch them out. I go through that engineering design process, that prototyping, that testing, all of that. So for me, this is a prosthetic that I made at home to describe and understand a little bit better on how these 3D printed prosthetics worked. So as I said, I was first introduced to these prosthetics through EMS, through being an EMT and encountering a patient with prosthetics. And it really inspired me to understand more and learn more. And I hope that this inspires you and teaches you how these kinds of prosthetics work. So we want prosthetics for individuals who need them to be as realistic as possible. So this looks like a very cool Iron Man kind of superhero hand, and it has 5 fingers, just like my hand has 5 fingers. It opens and closes a fist, just how my hand can open and close a fist, and that involves articulation. We have these tendons and our muscles in our hands that allow us to make these motions, these open and close, move our hands freely. And this prototype allowed me to understand better about the engineering and design process in regards to creating this kind of prosthetic and understanding how our hands work and function on their own. So what you're going to need for this is a piece of construction paper or a regular piece of printer paper, a pen or pencil. You're going to want some tape. So you're going to want tape and a pair of scissors. So if you're a younger audience member, please ask your parents for help when performing this prototype. So as I said, a few pieces of straws cut up, tape, and you're going to need some yarn or some string, some elastic. You're going to need 5 pieces. We're going to use 1 piece of string for each finger. So I already traced my design for all of you. I traced my hand, and when you're tracing, I just want to emphasize, make sure you spread out your fingers and then trace with your pen, your pencil, your marker. And make sure those fingers are spread out when you're tracing. And to save us a little bit of time, I already cut out a model of my hand for you. And as I said, you need those 5 pieces of string, those 5 pieces of yarn, maybe elastic if you have more material hands-on. And I have some pieces of tape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get those cut up pieces of straws. I cut them up at a few different sizes just to show you all. And I'm going to line them up where I need them on my fingers. So we're making a prototype. We're starting that engineering and design process just like the engineers who made these prosthetics possible. And I hope that this lesson inspires you to take household items that you may have lying around and create some beautiful engineering projects. So I tried my best to line them up, but I know which straws are going to go on. And my next step is going to be to string that yarn through each finger, through each straw. So you're going to want 2 pieces of straw. And here's my model right here, just so you can see right next to it. You're going to want to string those 2 pieces of straw on each piece of yarn and just line it up for each finger. Make sure your tape is handy. And remember, if you're a younger audience member, please ask your parents or a guardian for help with this project. So I'm going to go on. Remember, 2 pieces of straw. So someone asked, how do thought-controlled prosthetics work? So I'm actually going to go over that at the end of our presentation. I just want to show you this quick assembly on how to assemble this kind of project if you want to work on it at home. And for our older audience, I'm going to show you how to create this kind of project on a larger scale, on a more advanced scale, if you're an older engineer, if you're an older scientist. So same thing, I'm getting my last piece of yarn, my 2 pieces of straw, and I have them all set up and lined up. And the trick with this is to have your yarn stick out a little farther from your finger, and you're going to tuck that piece of yarn to the back when you're taping. So I'm going to show you that right now. I'm grabbing my piece of tape. I'm going to tape over my straw, just like that. So I'm going to tape over my straw, just like that. And I'm going to do that for each of my fingers. And as I said, you're going to grab that extra piece that you hung over your finger, and you're going to tape it to the back because you want to make sure it's secure. Any extra tape, it's okay. It won't affect your design. And when you're cutting your fingers, I definitely recommend cutting down a little more so you have a farther indent out. And you're going to do the same thing for each of our fingers. So I'm just going to go over it one more time. You're going to tape each straw down just like this. You're going to tape over the back end, and you're going to want it to look identical to this. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So I have these pieces of straw, and our goal at the end of this is going to have this kind of project. So taping these 2 pieces of straw to each finger. If you have longer fingers, I would recommend doing a 3rd piece of straw. And when I grab these all together at the end, they're all secured with that tape. That back piece is hanging over and secured with that tape. And I pull, I can see that articulation, that beautiful articulation that we see in our 3D printed prosthetics and our hands and our tendons. So think about these straws representing our bones, these pieces of yarn representing our tendons, and much, much more. So I'm just going to leave this on screen, and this video will be posted and shared so you can look back later on and do a step-by-step guide on how to create this beautiful project. So I'm going to switch over back to my camera and my presentation. Hello, everyone. So we talked about those modern prosthetics. We talked about that prototyping process. We talked about all these incredible ideas that we have. Let's talk a little bit about the careers that go into making these prosthetics. We're becoming a prosthetic artist, an engineer. So biomedical engineers are very common to work in this kind of field. Doctors, physical therapists, work with a lot of different patients. What you're seeing on screen here are more advanced prosthetics. These are called bionic prosthetics. There are 3D printed bionic prosthetics, but these are all mechanical. You can kind of see them being a little cyborg prosthetic, a robotic prosthetic. And these prosthetics are able to use the nerves in someone's body, sometimes controlled by an app on the iPhone. They're able to be controlled to those nerves where that arm or limb previously was, and be controlled by those nerves and usually the mind, and work and articulate in the same way that a normal prosthetic would. So I'm going to start taking some questions in our Q&A. I'm going to give it just a few minutes to have some questions fall into our Q&A. So you can go ahead and I'll answer any questions you may have. So for Barca, how do thought-controlled prosthetics work? So thought-controlled prosthetics, I think that you're referencing these bionic prosthetics, work with nerves. So although if I had an amputation above my elbow, these nerves that would have still controlled my fingers and my movements are still intact. So this woman that you're seeing in the top left animation, she's using something called those thought-driven prosthetics, as people say, but they're actually nerve-driven prosthetics. So as I said, I'm taking questions right now for our Q&A, and I did promise that older audience a way to make that prototype a little suitable for your age group. So I recommend making it a little more advanced by using this kind of design, maybe getting some harder materials to use, that cardboard, those straws, those strings, and you're able to understand that articulation, you're able to feel it a little more. And to everyone else, while I wait for some questions to come in, I really hope that this lesson has inspired you to either pursue a career in medicine, to learn a little bit about the more engineering and design process, and overall inspire you that anything is possible just from an idea, that you can take these household items and turn it into an incredible invention such as these 3D printed prosthetics. So as I wait for some questions to come in, I'm going to give it a few more minutes. I'm going to just show you some more articulation and a little more in depth on how these prosthetics were assembled, how they were used. So Sarah wants to know, is the smell that comes off the prosthetics, the filament, while it's printing, harmful to humans? So Sarah, that is an incredible question. I'm so happy that you asked that. So over time, any fumes that aren't natural can be dangerous to an individual. And that doesn't necessarily mean that on first impact they could be dangerous, but usually when you're 3D printing, I'd recommend having some good ventilation, opening a window, making sure fans on, making sure you're always having that fresh air circulating in your environment. Isra wants to know, are there more classes scheduled in the near future? Yes, absolutely. There are many classes you can find on our Facebook page, LC in the House. We have different live streams going on continuously. Next week, we're going to be doing another dissection series, so I will hopefully see a lot of you joined on that. Do I have any other questions? So in our last few minutes, just want to go over again this beautiful articulation, this beautiful design. So right here you have your brackets, and that's secured by these screws. These screws secure these plastic rectangles that are tied and connecting. This is actually a fishing wire that's strong enough and secured enough to be tied along with this elastic to run through these fingers and create that articulation, that movement. So Sarah wants to know, where will this video be posted? This video will be posted on our Facebook page. So you will be able to rewatch this video on our Facebook page. So you have these different screws, and these different screws function as just a placeholder to hold these pieces together. You have these different fingers connected, and I'm going to switch over to give you this better image, this dissected view. So you have these various pins that go into making this prosthetic, these various screws, these various parts that all working together into creating that articulation. So it looks like I don't have any more questions coming in right now, but for next time, if I see any questions, I will make sure to answer them in the chat after this lesson. And I just want to thank you all again so much for joining me today. Our Live from Surgery series is central to LSE's mission to inspire you and prepare for the next generation of scientists, engineers To all you future medical technicians, doctors, nurses, I encourage you to keep challenging yourselves, pursuing your STEM dreams. You represent a bright future for all of us. And as a nonprofit, the Liberty Science Center relies upon donations of all amounts to present this and our other STEM programs. So a special thanks goes out to our members and supporters. You can support us by visiting lsc.org/donate at any time. You can find these links on our website or at LSC in the house. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you at our next lesson. Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone. And goodbye, everyone.